Hello Year 13, this is your first video on our first chapter, first piece of work, and this all centres around preparation for sports performance and the warm-up specifically here. Just a key term for you to be aware of, you've probably heard this before but I just want to make sure it's there. Synergy. That term synergy, basically it says there in the definition, it is when two or more separate influences act together to create an effect greater than that of their separate parts. So for example, there you've got your physical conditioning and the fuel that you've consumed, so the food that you've eaten, how they come together to be bigger than any individual one of those. So that term will run through a lot of our work this year, so you need to be familiar with that for me, please. Just so you were aware, and this will carry through again alongside that term synergy, we're going to be looking at short-term and long-term adaptations, things that happen, their responses to exercise. So in the short term, we're looking for a response to exercise, something that changed quickly, it's a reaction to something. So when we're talking about the warm-up here, we'll be looking at their responses to that warm-up, their short-term reactions to the warm-up. And whereas a long-term effect is something that is inevitably over a longer period of time, it's more permanent, and like it says there, it's an adaptation, your body changes. None of this should be new to you. Okay, so we're looking at a warm-up and ultimately the reasons why we warm up and how we warm up. Those are the things that you're going to need to know if we are going to achieve the best possible sets of results. Why? You see the things in red there, and they're the three headlines. Why do we warm up? Firstly, to prepare the body for performance, and that's physically and mentally, and you'll look at the mental aspects more with Miss Jagger and the physical aspects with me, to give an improvement in performance and to reduce the risk of injury. And now notice there's a few question marks after that because that's slightly controversial. There's some contradictory research around that, and we'll discuss that more in class and a little bit later in this video as well. So we need to know the stages of the warm-up, and there are four. The initial preparation stage, and this might have been told to you before, is a pulse raiser, and we're looking at a gradual increase. So if you think about your warm-up for whatever sport it is that you do, you're going to have something that increases the heart rate. Pulse raiser is probably too vague or too basic terminology there. We're looking to increase the heart rate, and this comes with a gradual increase, getting more towards the desired level. The start of your warm-up is less intense than the end of your warm-up. Stage 2 is injury prevention, and this normally takes the shape of stretching. So we get increased muscle flexibility, therefore that leads to a reduced risk of injury. Again, like I say, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Just basic one there, the types of stretching, static and dynamic. Know the difference for very, very easy marks. There's nothing difficult there at all. Skill practice is where we then move in stage 3, and it's something that is specific to that sport. So I've used there the example of free throws in basketball. If you think about something that's specific to you, and you can include that in your notes. Now, in your sport, something that's specific that you would do in your warm-up that wouldn't happen in another. And then the sport-specific element of it is often in the skill practice bit, so it's often in that skill practice bit, but it is specific to the demands of your sport. So you'll see guys in rugby warm-ups taking on contact, doing some contact work in a way that a footballer or a netballer or other games players wouldn't necessarily do. So it's to do with the demands of your game rather than specific skills. Now, I've edited together some footage of a Man United warm-up for a couple of years ago. So it's basic footage. Someone's taking it out in the crowd, so don't look too much at the camera work. But what I want you to do is look at the stages of their warm-up. Like I say, I've edited it down, but look at the different things that go on in this warm-up, and I'll talk a few little bits over it while no, I won't. Where's that gone? Sorry. While I try and take out the crowd. So you can see they were running across the pitch there, doing a bit of stuff. There's that pulse raiser. They're now into some static stretches. The lunge there for the hamstring, the quadricep. Just some stuff there, loosening up the shoulders as well. None of this will be stuff that you've not seen before. It's all part of their specific Man United warm-up, and looking at certain bits of their body as well. What I want you to see now is a difference as they move from a static stretch, what we've got here for the hamstring, move from that to then you see something that's more dynamic, more ballistic, and you'll see that term, and they're looking at there the ankle joint. You see that fast hopping motion that they're doing, and then this is really interesting, that far more sport specific, that's a likely movement that they make. Their ankle is likely to experience that, and then they move into a full headed thing, that little backwards run. So we're now looking at sport specific stuff. Again, movements that you would that would replicate what they would need to do in a sport in their game setting. Just change the movement there, different set of target muscles, and then finally they go into some work with the ball, skill specific stuff. First touch, passing. Okay, I'm ready for game time. You'll notice that the intensity is not particularly high at this stage. We obviously don't know how far away it is from kickoff, but at that stage the intensity is not particularly high. So, what are the effects of a warm-up? Why do people actually do that? Now, if you look at table 1.1 in your textbook on page 6, you'll see the immediate responses to exercise. Now, all of this should be, some of this is building on GCSE stuff realistically, where you're talking about an increase in stroke volume, you are talking about an increase in venous return. You might see some of the stuff there might be a little bit newer to you, some talking about the sympathetic nervous system and end diastolic volume. Those kind of things might be a little bit newer to you, and we'll talk in detail about them, but you should have covered that last year. But then also you'll see next to it the key terms, which is absolutely brilliant, and page 6 will become a real reference point for you, I would imagine, as we go through the year, giving you what those definitions actually mean, the definitions of what those terms actually mean. So, the effects of a warm-up in terms of the responses to exercise are on page 6. In terms of stretching, we do get an increased elasticity in the muscles. That is something that scientists would argue definitely happens with a warm-up, and that leads therefore to an increased range of movement around a joint. If you think about your definition for flexibility at GCSE, that elasticity of muscle, the increase in that will give you that increased range of movement, and therefore the natural thought process was that led to a less chance of injury. There was less chance, because your muscles would stretch more, there was less chance of pulling a muscle. The problem we've got is that people started to question whether or not by stretching your muscles you were actually placing them under an unnecessary stress, and there was a chance that you were actually doing yourself more damage than actually you were through warming up, because of the little tears that are created when we work our muscles, as we're aware, and whether or not that was an actual negative. So you need to be aware of that, and we'll talk in more detail about that in class. I've put here dynamic versus static stretching, and the picture there of the elastic band, if you imagine, and I couldn't find a video of this, but if you imagine if you've got an elastic band in front of you, you're pulling that elastic band. I'm sure that's how a muscular contraction will have been described to you before. Here we've got static. What you're seeing there, that image, is a static stretch. So that muscle fibre, in this instance it's our elastic band, is being stretched and held. Yeah, so it's a static stretch. It's being held. This is like a traditional stretch, as opposed to a dynamic or ballistic stretch, which was much more what we saw the Man United team doing when they were jumping onto their ankle, onto their foot, that kind of thing. So it's a controlled movement where it's a ballistic dynamic stretch. What people would argue with a static stretch is that it doesn't replicate the game situation. At no point in a football match or a hockey match are you going to hold your muscle in one particular place, whereas a dynamic stretch does replicate the movements of a game. You can set that up, and we saw that with Man United there. So you need to just bear in mind the key differences between those there. Passive and active, this is fairly straightforward. So passive stretching is where you assume a position and you hold it without support. So it might be, if you put your leg up on a bar or a rail or what have you and hold it there. Whereas an active stretch is where you take the stretch a little bit further. So if you're sitting with straight legs, sat with straight back and straight legs out in front of you, and then you reach down to touch your toes, that's an active stretch. You're actively engaging the muscles to stretch them that little bit further. And finally, PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, is something that we'll have a bit of fun with in lesson because, well, you may get your hamstrings to do things that you never thought you would get them to do, particularly the boys, but we'll leave that one with you for now. Right, I hope this makes sense. You've got 10 minutes there of me talking to you. It should take you an awful lot longer than 10 minutes to get what you need out of the video. Having said that, this stuff is fairly straightforward, fairly basic. It's a nice, easy start into what we need, because the next time I do one of these, we'll be talking about ATP, Krebs cycle, phosphocreatine, all of those sort of things as well, and it starts to get a little bit more complex.